Trading away young, talented players is not a recipe for success long-term in fantasy football. However, there are extreme cases where we must adjust. Ultimately, making the right move in this type of situation still comes down to whether a player is outperforming expectations when analyzing all the factors, including historical comparisons. If the answer is yes, the player is overperforming, just like with any other sell high option, we want to move as quickly as possible, preferably after the player just had a good game. Now, that last part is not intuitive. Instinctually, we want to hold on to that last good game that the player provided. So it's time to get uncomfortable, because after combing through all of the data for the first 2 weeks of the season and running historical comps, it is time to sell high on one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL. It absolutely pains me to say this because I love this player, but our sell high candidate is Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, currently the wide receiver 21, averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game. Talent is not the issue with Garrett Wilson. He has a 30% target share to start the season. That's ninth best in the NFL. He has a 47% air yard share. That is elite. And you guys have heard me talk about those two numbers in the past. Those things correlate highly with fantasy production. We also saw the big playability this last weekend against the Dallas Cowboys. It wasn't a great day for Wilson, but that 68-yard catch and run helped provide fantasy managers with the points that they needed. If you're a dynasty manager with Garrett Wilson on your roster, you should be elated. He looks like a future top 6 fantasy wide receiver. In fact, he's a buy low over in Dynasty. Now, season-long players, I'm sure you're sitting here wondering, so what's going on? I mean, are we buying Garrett Wilson or are we selling? What is happening here? And the answer is yes. We are still selling despite all of this talent, and there are some very compelling reasons why. All of the factors pushing us to sell on Garrett Wilson are all external. They don't come back to him. And we hate that sort of scenario. The challenge is I don't see a way this gets better for the Jets this season. There are just too many obstacles stacked against the young wide receiver. Guys, this isn't good. We can go over to the utilization tools on fantasylife.com, which you can see for free, and we can click on team styles and see that the Jets drop back rate over expectation is actually minus 7%. In fact, last week against the Cowboys, with them trailing by 4+ points or more on 76% of snaps, 76%, they were still minus 4% in drop back rate over expectation. That is creating major challenges. They are only averaging 49 plays per game. So that ranks second worst in the NFL for plays per game. And then we know they want to try and run the ball, so they rank third worst in dropbacks per game. Even if Garrett Wilson continues to stay on the field for a 98% route participation with his 20% targets per route run he has so far this year, that would put him on pace for 100 targets in a 17-game season. So let's assume things get a little better for the Jets. Let's bump them up to 32 dropbacks per game. Let's take Garrett Wilson up to 22% targets per route run because he is a baller after all. That comes to 117 targets. It's not bad. You're going to get some good weeks out of Garrett Wilson, but that is not what we spent a round 2 pick for in fantasy drafts. So now we have to factor in that quarterback accuracy challenge. Zach Wilson, only 44% of his targets to Garrett Wilson in week 2 were deemed catchable. However, the two have had a decent connection compared to Zach Wilson's overall completion percentage the first 2 seasons. They're at 59%. So let's use that number against the 100 targets and the 117 targets, and we come to 59 to 69 catches. It's going to take a lot for Garrett Wilson to have a shot at getting to 80 catches this season. In fact, it would probably require a quarterback change. So let's take a little bit of a different approach rather than just using the math, and let's look at the historical comps using data that goes back to 2011 and the following criteria. First of all, team dropbacks of 34 or less. Remember, right now the Jets are at 29.5. 85% route participation or higher. Right now, Garrett Wilson's at 98%. And then for targets per route run, let's go 19 to 25%. Right now, Garrett Wilson is at 20%, and his career average with Zach Wilson is at 21%. The average production for wide receivers in this comp group was 12.5 points per game. I did remove players that didn't have at least 15 games played, and their average finish was wide receiver 32. The max finish of this group was 15 points per game with a wide receiver 18 finish, and that was Tyler Lockett in 2021. The low finish was Eric Decker in 2011, and he scored 9.6 points per game and finished as the wide receiver 49. It's important to note that the wide receivers on this list are pretty good players. They just were in tough situations. We've got names like DK Metcalf, Golden Tate, DJ Moore, Corey Davis, Marquise Brown, Michael Pittman, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, these guys have talent, but they just couldn't overcome their situation. So while it's really hard to imagine selling a player like Garrett Wilson, who's so talented, this data is really telling us that's exactly what we need to do, especially if we've got a league mate that still values Garrett Wilson as that round 2 pick that we spent on him in fantasy drafts. Right now, industry consensus has Garrett Wilson ranked as the wide receiver 22 heading into week 3. That number is very likely to fall in coming weeks. And while it is possible that Wilson is just a far better talent than all of the players in his comp group, remember, we gave a range of up to 25% targets per route run to help catch some of that variance. Wilson's only at a 21% targets per route run over the course of his career. And also remember, I didn't even calculate in the accuracy challenges of Zach Wilson in our final comp group. I couldn't because it limited the sample so much that we couldn't find the data reliable. So that data point in itself tells us how much of an outlier situation this is. It is really bad to be on a team where you're going to run as few passing plays and have those accuracy challenges, and it just isn't adding up for Garrett Wilson. The other thing we can feel more comfortable about, even if he does blow away expectations, we're probably not trading away a top 6 wide receiver. In the best case, we're probably getting rid of a mid-range wide receiver 2, and that can help us think more clearly as we consider what trade options we want to pursue.